Hey people, how you doing? Welcome to the Sports Therapy Association podcast, episode 207. My name is Matt Phillips, creator of RunChatLive.com. And as always, this episode is being recorded live on the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel and on the Sports Therapy Association Facebook page. So if you are listening to the podcast, and thank you very much for engaging with us, do please leave a review if you like the show. If you don't like it, then just disappear. It's fine, you don't have to say anything. But if you do fancy, if you'd like the idea of joining us live, then all you need to do is go along to YouTube at 8 o'clock, Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel, or Facebook if you prefer, and join us live. And that gives you the chance to obviously ask questions directly to our great guests, and also to hang out with other people in the live lounge and kind of network. And when you do ask a question or say hi, then I can bring that up onto the screen, which often means you're going to share your logo or share your business logo. So yeah, it's a great opportunity to mix and learn at the same time, which is a pretty healthy environment, if I say so myself. So in this episode coming out shortly, entitled "Is Your Client Ready to Return to Sport?", my special guest joining us is Steve Miller, founder of GrowPhysioAcademy.com. Steve is a rehabilitation specialist currently with GB Judo, which we're going to hear about very shortly. And he's already well known amongst quite a lot of you STA members for his excellent courses and webinars, one of which is actually happening tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. if you're listening to this live. And it's all about Achilles injuries in sport. STA members are entitled to 15% off. So if you are joining us live, then make sure you head to the STA members area after this. Don't go now. And look for details, and you can get a great discount from a wonderful educator in our industry. And we'll be discussing some of his other courses very shortly. But before I bring Steve Miller up, I just want to give you a heads up for next week's episode on Tuesday, July the 30th. I shall bring it up onto the main screen for those of you who are joining us in the live lounge. What do you reckon about statutory regulation for sports therapists? That's what we're going to be talking about. It's back in the news now. Some people are thinking with a new government, then finally we've got a chance to all get statutory regulation. Everything's going to be fantastic and amazing. It's just what industry needs to thrive. We'll be just like physios. Other people are a little bit more skeptical, and they think that maybe we are chasing a little bit of a pipe dream, which either can't happen or there's more cons than pros. So I'm going to be joined next week by Anna Maria Mazzieri, the director of the ST School, and also by Gary Benson, founder of the STA. And we're going to have a big chat about the pros and cons of statutory regulation for sports therapists, and also look at the history of what's been attempted and not really achieved up to now. But we want to know what you think about it. So basically, if you have got some feelings, whether you think it's a great idea, a bad idea, maybe if you just don't know much about it, then head along to social media for the STA, which is at UK_STA on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And leave a comment on the statutory regulation post you will find there. It's not there at the moment, although there is one that Gary posted recently in the Sports Therapy Association Facebook feed. But I will put a few more out there just for people to leave comments, because as part of next week's show, we want to address some of the ideas that people put forward to you, the listener, because there is quite a lot, as always, a little bit of misinformation and a bit of lack of information out there. So that's what we're going to address next week. Do join us if you want to. If you listen to the podcast, then we're talking about Tuesday, July the 30th, 8 o'clock on YouTube. It's going to be a very interesting, fact-filled episode. So we'd love to have you there to give us your ideas and give the Anna Maria and Gary something to comment on and talk about. Right, back to tonight's episode. Let's get rid of that for now. Is your client ready to return to sport? With my special guest, Steve Miller, founder of GrowPhysioAcademy.com. Let's bring him up. Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Very well, thanks, Matt. Yourself?
I'm okay. I'm just thinking, I hope people realise that I was being a little bit sarcastic and cynical when I said we could be just like physios, because it is just something which a lot of sports therapists do kind of feel a bit with imposter syndrome, and they compare ourselves to physios. They don't really get, as we've talked about before, they don't get that MSK is only a very small part of what it is to be a physio. Did you do some time in, because people are going to email me saying, "Oh, Matt, you can see you got another physio on the show, have you?" Thanks, Matt. And also, saying out your website, Grow Physio Academy. I'm going to get some emails saying, "Oh, not Grow Sports Therapy Academy, is it?" So what's your deal? Because you are a sports rehab specialist. How much of what you do today it's thanks to the physio training you did.
Yeah, I think we discussed this a tiny bit, didn't we, last time, in terms of sort of the backgrounds, really. And I am someone who went into physio thinking I was always going to end up in a sporty world doing MSK. And I think that was pretty apparent from the off, really. So I didn't do rotations in a traditional NHS style, but I did go and work for the NHS and sort of connect health and things in primary care for about 7 years. And I think that exposure to rheumatology, neurology, respiratory things, little red flags that come up now and again that aren't MSK related, were really nice to pick up on. Working alongside GPs in some of these sort of little polyclinics and things is really, really handy. So yeah, it definitely taught me a lot, sort of from a holistic perspective, during just the standard sort of 2,000 clinical hours that we used to have to do, moving around different specialisms as a student. And then, yeah, sort of working in that environment, lots and lots of sort of scope and specialists that would come in and talk to us through flagging rheumatology issues, neurology things, a little cancer potentials and lumps, bumps and things like that, really. So it wasn't that we're the specialists in those at all, but certainly sort of flagging them, highlight them, and then ship them on to the right person as quick as you possibly can, really.
Definitely. Red flags. This is something we'll talk about loads with guests, and we love having people from different professions on, because one of the things I'm always harping on about is, if you're going to do any CPD as anything, whatever you are, do some CPD on the red flags so you can signpost, so you can signal out to specialists, whether it's female pelvic health, male pelvic health, could be rheumatology. That's the things, because especially in our industry, I think we're going to see lots of sports people, and we're not going to be seeing a lot of kind of like non-sports people, and we might kind of fall prey to being a little bit slack and not recognizing some of the masqueraders. So it is so important, isn't it, to, like you say, keep up on knowledge and know whether somebody's exhibiting something which could be systemic, and not just treat everything as an MSK problem. So what about Team GB? So let's talk about that briefly, because I'm just going to share this photo, which I put through you earlier on, and you said, yeah, that's fine, you can show that. I'm just going to put this photo for people who have joined us live. Thanks for joining us live, people who are coming into the live lounge. For those of you who can't see this photo, Steve is going to talk you through it now and say what's going on and who's in the photo.
So this all escalated a little bit quickly, but the premise of this really is, tomorrow we have 5 of the female athletes that I work with in British Judo who are going to represent Team GB at the Olympic Games. So they all fly out tomorrow. Your general day-to-day stuff, it seems a little bit cringy to go and get a photo, but I thought, you know what, it'd be quite nice to get a photo. So I thought, you know what, let's stand in front of the GB Judo way sign, let's get a little standing photo. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the girl in the middle, Lucy, just said, come on, let's pick him up. So that then escalated to, look at this Olympic lift. Do you know what I mean? And the Olympic lifting, ollie lifting kind of way that you do in a gym. This was their equivalent of an Olympic lift, really. So, yeah, I probably should have contracted Core a little bit better and helped her out rather than just get on her head. But
that's great photo. And they look so happy. Really, yeah. So these have all qualified and they're off tomorrow.
Yes. So, yeah, all different weight categories that they're competing in. I think they've all got a huge chance of medaling. The graph that these guys put in is unbelievable. I didn't know a huge amount about judokas before moving into this world, but in terms of specimens, athletes, and the graph that they put in, they are ridiculous. I think every single one could be a gladiator that you hear, to be honest. Like, as all-round athletes, running, power, explosiveness, pure strength, mat strength, all these kind of things, like, they are phenomenal. So
fantastic. Yeah, and great role models. It's so nice. I mean, I'm biased because in this industry and with guests, it's we've got such a history, haven't we, of being concentrating on male athletes, and all the research is on samples with males and that. And so we're really trying to push women in sport, and obviously strong women. And yeah, I'm sure those 5 are good examples of particularly strong women.
And yeah, to big them up a little bit more, yeah, this is they are our 5, so we don't actually have any men who've competed and qualified for the games this year, sadly. I think it's the first time ever in judo history, but these girls are, yeah, on a whole different level, on a scary level. When you see them, I certainly wouldn't want to meet them in a back alley sort of thing, but they are, yeah, destined
fantastic
for greatness.
Great to watch. Great to watch. Love it. Excellent. So Just briefly, you've got, I'm going to bring up let's bring up your webpage next, if that's okay. Again, if you're listening to the podcast, you don't see this. It's just because people do like joining us live and seeing the visuals. And I get feedback saying, oh, Matt, I love it when you bring up the screenshots and stuff. So this is for the people who have joined us live. Let's put this on full. So what I'm bringing up here is a screenshot of growphysioacademy.com. As always, just recommend you totally go along there. Don't be put off by the name. I'll have a go at Steve later on for calling it Grow Physio instead of Grow. What else do you put? But it's, I mean, if we just jump to the courses and have a little look at them, Steve can take us through some of those there. There's something there which is obviously going to help anybody who's working with athletes. 𝐒𝐻𝐫𝐴𝐻's practical courses. We'll take us through what sorts of variations have we got in there, Steve?
Yeah, I've just tried to give all the insights that I don't think that I got at university, really, in terms of the practical application. So yeah, if I started off at the bottom, so I started off with the Achilles. So as you mentioned, Matt, so tomorrow I'm going to do sort of almost take people through the management of tendinopathies and ruptures of an Achilles, how you calm them down, how you rebuild them, and then reintegrate them back into sport. And then really what each course does ideally is goes through the practical assessment, the treatments and interventions, hands-on, taping, modalities, whatever it may be, and then a lot of the sort of rehabilitation. And then for probably 90% of the courses, I think it's really nice to see the whole journey. So what I've done is put a real case study from one of the areas that I've worked in sport and private practice, and then almost given that as a bit of an overview. So you can sometimes know the theory, but how it all pieces together is sometimes difficult. And also just acknowledging it doesn't always go very well, or it might go brilliantly. So if there are things that have gone really well, the reflective bit on why I think they've gone well, and maybe some things that could have gone better, or what's happened with other athletes, because sometimes you've just got to have that mileage and go through the journey. And it's really a big privilege for someone to give you the ownership of managing their injury back into sport. And I think it has to be met with that same sort of level of preparation, and it's really hard to find enough time to go to the levels that you need to. Like working in sport is definitely not a 9 to 5 switch off kind of job. You do end up sort of sitting on evenings, sometimes planning rehabilitation sessions, prehab sessions, trying to mix things up depending on what you've seen. But it's really worthwhile, really valuable. And yeah, I've just tried to give my insights really into that. And yeah, there'll be quite a few new courses that are coming up now. The Olympics are sort of hopefully coming out the way. So there's a lot of things that are just unfinished. Like there's lots of testing protocols, how you actually test and screen individuals, what stuff's actually useful, because you can drown, can't you, in data if you overcook it. But yeah, just the really pertinent things that I think are really handy and applicable for people. I just had a guy actually just last month contact me from India, who said he basically smashed through everything in sort of 6 to 8 hours a day, done it as a placement, and in a month he basically completed it and then tapped out. And I'm like, that is exactly what I wanted to create, almost, was a placement for people who have time. Summer holidays are coming up. Like if you are sitting in if the weather's been pretty tragic, hasn't it, so far? So if you have got time, then yeah, do feel free to drop on and smash out as much of it as you want.
Amazing. And we should reiterate, just in case people have joined us and we were talking about judo. It's not just for kind of martial arts. It's all sorts of sports. You've got footballers, runners, all sorts of injuries and examples up there. Yeah,
there's a bit of a mix of my life in Premiership rugby, which again sort of encompasses more running, sprinting, dynamic athletes, rather than the people who only move around like a 10 by 10 square, really, don't they?
Excellent. Right. So yes, people go and check out growphysioacademy.com and have a little look. Really practical based courses. Yeah, definitely something there, which I love the idea. They are so practical, and you can just have a look at something which maybe applies to your particular clients and just think, oh, I really need some help with that. Bam, there you got it. Webinar. Yeah, great stuff. And also you're going to be at Therapy Expo, aren't you, this November, which is going to be very exciting as well. Yeah, so thank you for that. We'll have more details about Therapy Expo coming up, revealing all of our speakers after the summer holidays, when people have got their thinking heads back on. After, like you say, this blistering sun, which we've been going through, this heat wave in the United Kingdom, the great United Kingdom. So there we go. Right, so here we go. Is your client ready to return to sport? That's what we're going to be talking about. Let's start maybe. Does the title kind of suggest that some clients, in your experience, are being sent back to their sport an inappropriate time? Is it something which can plague success rates for clinicians?
Yeah, and this is certainly not trying to lambast anyone or kind of say that people aren't doing jobs well or anything like that at all. But I think a lot of the time what I was getting when I was in private practice were a lot of sort of second and third sort of opinions that people were sort of sending through. And there was just some really common trends that tended to sort of present really of reasons why people were breaking down with injuries. Maybe they were still not sort of psychologically ready to return yet. They just don't feel like they have reached the levels that they wanted to reach during their rehabilitation. So I think rehab I only learned to rehab well by moving into sport. My world before this at Connect Health and working in part-time sport just didn't give me the access or the time or the eyes-on time to actually go through rehab well. And a lot of the time, what I had was a room that was like a GP room with a few therabands, maybe a couple of little dumbbells, and that was about all I had to work with. And when you think of the forces and the demands on some of these individuals, it doesn't come anywhere near close to replicate anything that people require. And quite a lot of the time I found it quite frustrating because I was sort of saying, well, when you get in the gym, or what have you got access to outside of here? And if people didn't have access to these things, then you couldn't get them to do it. And often, even when you get people to squat and they've got a knee or something like that they're not very confident in, they're always going to bias the other side, which again, in a gym environment, often isn't much of an issue. But if they're reluctant to step off that side or cut off that side, again, those sorts of things might lead to re-injury. It might lead to secondary injury. It might just be an accumulative of nature of tightness building up on one side because they're just not using it, little stress reactions in bones. And it's certainly sort of things that I think I've just picked up on. When I look back at what I was doing, I was pretty poor at rehab. And that was one of the big driving reasons why I kind of wanted to move into a more sporting environment where I had more time. And when I say time, for anyone who works in sport, pick a sport that gives you time. I've picked rugby and judo, which are very injury heavy. And often we had 17 people in rehab during the hour and a half slot that we have for rehab. So that is not going to give me the quality time one-on-one with people that sometimes you crave. So if you're at Man City and you've got one athlete to look after for the entire week and that's your job, it's a very different world to sometimes these really, really busy rehab slots. And it wasn't that we had 17 injuries, but 17 people who were transitioning back into full training, sort of prepping for competition, had little work-ons, niggles, etc., that they needed to kind of just keep up with. But it is a very busy environment. So if there's only you, which is often the case, and 17 athletes was the worst it was in my time in this Olympic cycle, you sort of, I mean, I've got no hair already, but no doubt it would have all fallen out had I had a few strands remaining, to be fair, because it's really tough. And you get charged up, or I get my sort of positive reinforcement bits and get that energy and ikigai, if you like, from actually doing a really good job working one-on-one, really kind of helping and supporting and looking at the minutiae. So it's lovely when people go away on camps and it leaves some of the injured 3 or 4 who you can really get into the sort of roots of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Do you think, I don't know what it's like for you, I'm not saying this is your success rate or your prevalence of re-injury, but we've heard kind of time and time again, I think it's still safe to say that one of the biggest risk factors for being injured in a sporting environment is having had that injury before. Do you think, how much of that in your experience do you think is because the rehab that athlete was given wasn't sufficient to reduce the risk of re-injury? Or is it something we should always expect that however well we rehab a client, the chances are they're in a sport which is a chaotic environment and they're just going to get injured again, especially when they're trying to reach the levels of excellence such as your clients? But is it something we should be doing better, or is it always going to happen, re-injury?
I mean, I don't think anyone can eradicate an injury risk at all. But I think what we try and do in rehab is mimic the scenarios, prepare someone so if that sort of force or angle of force that comes in for someone, like knees are a classic one with lots of MCLs, lots of ACLs in judo, just because of the nature of the positions that they put themselves in. If you're off balance or someone who's heavy lands on your knee at any time, it will probably cause an MCL or an ACL injury, but done at speed and power and the velocity that's required, it just becomes more and more risk. And I think it marries up the question marks of like, are you gym strong? Are you mat strong? Are you neuromuscularly tuned in well enough to it? And I think sometimes the little triangle of those things can really be, if there's a missing component, can be something that you need to kind of either dial up in one area, maybe dial down at different other times. But yeah, I mean, once you've got an injured area, it's certainly going to be more vulnerable. I would say that always the best heal seems to be the first heal. So if you get it right first time, nature and all the sort of scar tissue and adhesions and whatever else that form there tends to be better if it's the first time round. If you are someone who's just constantly irritated, niggling things over and over and over again, the tissue is going to potentially change. All of the sort of central sensitization and sort of listening and what's happening around there in the sort of central nervous system is also going to likely ramp up more and more. And then there's sort of checks and things as well once people are back and you have rehabilitated them, to make sure that it might be that they look amazing once they go back and you've kind of got them through all their strength markers, all of their mobility, dynamic markers, all of their power markers. You've introduced them incrementally into all the training components. They've got back into competition. And then what normally happens is people forget to do the little work-ons, the top-ups that actually got them to that state already. So just gradually, what normally happens is people go back into competition. They then get into the swing of, all right, I'm doing training, I'm doing 100% components. And then the stimulus that has almost protected the tissue, they may need to kind of bolt on as an extra. And I think that's the really challenging bit, to be that annoying physio, sports therapist, whoever you are, to keep on now and again, set little reminders on your phone every week or every month to kind of tune back in with them and say, where are you now? And are you managing to do the little extra work-ons? And are you managing to allocate a time in their diary so that they get that stimulus? Because it's very easy. If we think about something like an Achilles tendinopathy, for example, you maybe have rehabilitated them, you've done isometrics, maybe done some dynamic isometrics, you've got them concentrically, eccentrically strong, you've done that sort of return to impact, you've got them running, they're back doing their park run 5Ks and what have you, and that's what they do for the next 6 to 8 weeks. And then all that happens is they then don't do the high load, long sustained stimulus that they might require to keep those strength markers really high through that Achilles. And they just rely on, well, I'm back now and I don't need to do these things. And I think that's a common trend. So the rehab might have been done incredibly well, but people think that once they're back in full training, they're getting enough of a hit that keeps those markers high. So what we've tried to do, and this is something that I've really kind of tried to drive and get all the S&C team on board, is whenever people come in on a morning, we alternate between a specific strength test that they do as a marker alongside some of their mobility scores that they'll do. So we just end up with a world where if something starts to drop off, we catch it before they get injured and go, oh, I wonder what that strength level was like. Oh, had it dropped off? Had it not? And it's only something that you do for sort of 30 seconds a minute. So it's not really something that you kind of really fatiguing anyone with, but it's really nice to have that little touch point of data to wonder whether people are starting to drift. And it's sometimes a bit of a kick up our backside and a bit of a kick up their backside to get onto some of those little drills. And they're often surprised, oh, I didn't think that would have dropped off, because I'm doing every minute of every session in training or competition.
Excellent. So there's an awful lot of education there that therapists, whether you're a physio or sports therapist or anything, you need to be doing with your clients and accompanying their journey, staying with them, even though when they return to sport, and they naturally, good on them, they feel confident. They're like, yeah, I'm great, I'm back, it's going to be great. But actually, you're saying that the return to sport needs to be treated as still part of rehab, and they still need to be monitored there.
So I think, I can't remember what the little quote was I had, but it was almost like assessing. If you're not assessing, you're guessing. But also on the back of that, it's the monitoring side and giving them the skills and the tools so they can recheck things. And it might just be simple things like they go in the gym and they do a leg press calf raise or an isometric hold on the weight that they were at, and actually compare side to side, the injured to the non-injured, is that starting to drop off? Or you look at the endurance of that muscle, how many repetitions can they do? Calf raises to normally like a metronome is what we do, but almost just if they count in the head, that's absolutely fine. So 3 ups, 3 downs. But yeah, I think having little checkpoints that you ask them to keep an eye on as a bare minimum on a monthly basis would be my advice, really. Obviously, if you've got more eyes on and more access to them, the better. But yeah, a lot of the time what will happen is you get someone in private practice, you rehabilitate them really well, they get back to doing what they're doing, and then you sort of see them drift in with something else about 3 or 4 months later, and they're like, God, this was just getting tight, so I was stretching it, mobilizing it, but it's just not disappearing. And I think that's a really common thing that you tend to find. And that might not be that your rehab's not been done well, but they haven't kept on top of the little markers. So I think the world that we moving into is so much more data supported. So we actually put numbers onto a lot of things. And I find that that's a big motivator for the athletes anyway, so they can see the differences. Your sort of classic one of, oh, does it feel better? Oh yeah, it feels better after I've had this or that. How can you then marry that up with some numbers to sort of support even further, really? Is that something that you find, Matt, at all in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much into being able to measure things, but it's the person in front of you, isn't it? We were talking a little bit off air. If you're working with somebody who desperately wants to get back to their park run or desperately wants to get back to the mat, if you ask them, does that feel better? And all they want to do in their mind is get back to their game because it's their identity, it's their friends, it's everything about them is getting back to that mat or racetrack, whatever it is, or pitch. They're going to say, yeah, that's kind of all right, isn't it?
Yeah.
It maybe that person in front of you, or you might get the person in front of you who you know is the opposite, and they're a little bit tentative, and they're always going to say, oh, I'm not quite sure, or it doesn't feel right, or can I really do this yet? You might even get that, even though they're big, strong, elite male or female athlete. By nature, they might, or because of previous experience or fear or a friend or something, they might have that kind of resistancy and kinesiophobia, as we kind of call it. So I just love, as a therapist, whether I'm doing it online or face-to-face, is getting to know the athlete in front of you, isn't it? That's such a huge thing. And I guess that doesn't matter what level they are. You work with like elite of the elite who are going to the Olympics. Do you still find it's so important that the person in front of you can dictate what sort of rehab you give them?
Yeah, 100%. So what our rehab will look like with one ACL might look completely different with another ACL. And I just think about one of the girls that we have at the moment who basically, when I joined British Judo, she just had her second ACL repair. So she'd done her left and then she did her right. And to be honest, the journey she'd been on, she'd gone through her rehab with her original ACL, which had a few little bumps on it on the road in the first place. She'd then gone back and done what's called a test fight. So just before competing, one of the other athletes basically mimicked the role of a competitor and they fought live, almost like all the shackles come off, everything, all guns blazing. And basically that was when she did her ACL on the other side. So she never, after a full, I think it was like a 14-month journey, then was about to compete, but did her other ACL. So then coming into this, I was sort of tasked with, I've managed a lot of ACLs in rugby and some in football and sort of other sports and random things like skateboarding and all that kind of thing in private practice. But to do a judo knee was always going to be a little bit different. But actually, I think the approach that I had sort of made it different enough from her original journey. And that one had been done by a guy who's there at the moment who is probably one of the best rehabbers I think I've ever worked with. So he's done absolutely nothing wrong. The knee's unfortunately just been vulnerable, put in a position on the other side. And that is then exactly what you're sort of saying, sort of feeding into that kinesiophobia things at the moment. She's just coming back. She's going out to be a partner at the Olympics. And she's done so well after 2 and a bit years of non-stop rehab to get to a stage where she is now flying with both knees. But for a long time, we were doing exactly what you're saying. We sent her for testing because we said, you're doing really well. But she really had a lot of psychological barriers about returning to the mat because she didn't even get there in a competition. So obviously, as soon as it comes back to that stage, she won't do any test fights. She's competed now, but missed out that part because that was just a psychological block for her. And actually, yeah, a lot of the scores that we've done with her have been the other way around, going, you are absolutely smashing this. Your LSI, comparing left to right side, are exactly the same. And then when we look at that against the other athletes in your weight category and right through, you're way above where they are as well. So overall, we're trying to feed in a positivity vibe for a long time. And then now she's got back to competition, I think everything's sort of fallen into place. But inevitably, if you're in a little dark gym for a couple of years, not seeing the whole reason why you're actually doing this sport, it's really tough. And I think as a physio, as a sports therapist, working in this environment, this was the first time I've worked with female athletes, the more holistic approach that I have to take is so different to anything that I've done previously. And actually managing the psychological side, the mental side, flagging that and sending that to sort of lifestyle or the psych team if it's just too much. But the amount of tears that have actually been on this judo outfit this year is remarkable, like no other year of my life. And that's really demanding, I think, for therapists as well. Like you're taking on stuff that you're just a constant emotional sponge. And actually to then keep on delivering a positive performance and service to everybody else and not get caught in that, that's something that I think we don't get enough help with as therapists. So if anyone is sort of listening to this and going, wow, it's all getting a bit much, it's getting on top of me, all I hear is people moaning about their knees, their shoulders, their apprehensions, their stresses, blah blah blah, it is really demanding on us. So do reach out and get help. And just, yeah, talk to people about how tough that is, because that is definitely something that I've never been prepped for, and actually initially needed a little bit of support and help with to kind of deload me in different areas, because it was just mounting with all these people just crying on me and blah blah blah. And it was, yeah,
that's a great point.
But yeah,
a few weeks back we had, I'm not sure whether you've met her or know of her, Jo Turner of 𝐒𝐲𝐻.co.uk. You know Jo, yeah, who's exactly all about that, and she's always saying, especially in our profession, we really are giving, and there's a lot of emotional attachment, and like you said, emotional sponges. And yeah, it's really important you don't burn out and don't give some time to yourself and that, and it can just ruin you and therefore your business and your clients and everything. It's just, so yeah, great point. And we've got a few questions coming up now, if that's all right with you. Gary here, I'll come back to you, Israel, if that's okay. A little bit of a case history coming up with Israel. Let's go for Gary first of all. Founder of the STA says, one of the potential problems in sport is the pressure put on rehab team by coaches to get players playing before they complete the rehab continuum. Have you experienced this, Steve? Yeah, how much pressure is there on you?
Yeah, I think this is something that I would recommend everybody. Once you've assessed something, don't rush into the coach's room and go, I've assessed it, this is what it is, this is how long it's going to take. Spend a bit of time just stepping back and going, right, this is what I think's going on. Has there been anybody else who's had a similar injury? What experiences have I had? If I haven't had them, chat to people who maybe have experienced this kind of thing. If you haven't got that, reach out to people on socials, have a look at protocols that are maybe online. Like there is so much amazing material out there to work out roughly how long this will take. And then if it says this is a 12-week injury, I would just say to the coaches, it's a 12 to 16-week injury, because it gives you that little buffer. If things don't go quite to plan, you've got that little window. If you bring them back at 12 weeks, like all the research and everybody's saying, then you're doing a fantastic job. But I think if you are in a position where you go, you know what, it's 12 to 16, but all I'm going to do is go off a milestone-based approach where we're going to basically build the foundation, have the certain markers along that journey. It's really nice to have the journey mapped out, and it'll probably help you to make like a blueprint. And anyone who wants sort of access to this kind of thing, I'm sort of in the process of putting all this together. So for something like a grade 2 MCL, in our world, that would probably be like a 12 to 14-week injury. What are they going to do along each week? And it might be every couple of weeks that you kind of chop it into, but you want to have a rough plan of how that journey is going to look. And then you can kind of communicate that with the coaches, but put the caveat on that actually he needs to be hitting them, or she needs to be hitting the markers as we go. And actually, I know and make something up if you want to, but I know that from experience, these can be very, very slow initially. So this phase might be a little bit longer, but actually, hopefully that'll buy us a little bit of time later on. But yeah, I think probably going off a milestone approach rather than a hard and fast, they're going to be available on this date without fail, is probably a better way to go. They will always push you and push you and push you, and then look at the calendar and go, right, well, there's this match or this competition that is on this date. Can I put them in for that? And I think you've just got to hold firm and go, you know what, this is a recent injury. This is how long it's going to take. I will update you as things go, because yeah, everybody wants their individuals and athletes and all that kind of thing available. The risk, again, you can kind of package it as we can potentially get them back quicker. That comes with an increased risk potentially that they may not have hit the markers. If they're not hitting their symmetry markers, their sort of markers compared to other athletes in this environment, then they may be a bit undercooked. Or if you get them back quicker, we often have they need to have done for a significant injury over sort of 3 months, plus they have to have done 4 weeks of full training to get back in. And that's actually something that the coaches said, they're not sharp unless they've done 4 weeks of that sort of full training. So actually you flip it around the other way and go, right, well, if you want 4 weeks of full training, actually to get us to that point, if we incrementally drip them in, can you see how it's going to take this much longer? And if you can pinch a few little weeks or anything somewhere that they're on board with, you're on to a bit of a winner, really, because there's going to be more healing that takes place. But it's a really good question, Gary, and hopefully that answers it in some ways.
Great question, Gary. There's so much in there that I wanted to ask you more about. So yeah, being clear, not just with the coaches, but also with the athlete themselves, of how long this could take. That's really tricky, isn't it? Because again, depending on the person in front of you, if you know the person can take it, and it's like, if you say, yeah, it's going to be 18 weeks, if they're not going to go, oh my God, and just give up and feel, distraught by that, which you could just throw some people off the track, then you can give it to them. But other people, like I say, you're going to have to kind of break it to them gently or at different moments of time. But ultimately, in your mind, you're going to have to still help them realize. And also, like the thing you said about clear markers, which I wanted to talk to you about now. Let's imagine. Okay, well, look, hold on. This is a good case where we could use our friend Israel here, who's coming with a question here. So Israel, he's dislocated his shoulder now a couple of times in MMA. I think the second time it was throwing a punch and it came out. Second time in 7 years. Obviously, it's very difficult. Well, it's impossible without assessing properly and everything and knowing all the case history and all the other things. But an idea of markers, I don't know whether you've had similar experiences in judo with arms being dislocated, but give us an idea. And this isn't, don't start writing this down, Israel, because this is not a routine for you, but it's just to give you some idea. What sort of markers would you progress before that person could even go back into training? We'll talk about training afterwards and to what extent you could start punching full, just bags or people. But yeah, to get to that training again, what would they need to be demonstrating?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I'm probably someone who is maybe a little bit more gym-based focus early on, rather than rushing to get them to do sort of seated gripping and all this kind of stuff, really, because I sort of feel like if I create a foundation that I know is strong through range, in the ranges that they're potentially going to be vulnerable in, as soon as you start introducing variables and uncertainty in this sort of chaos buzzword that's kind of flying around, the risk of injury is going to ramp up considerably. Now, that's hard because you've got to balance up well, you don't just want to make someone purely gym strong, because actually all the neuromuscular control and reaction time and responding to what your opponent's doing is really, really important. But at the same time, if we haven't got that sort of confidence and markers and things that we require, it's really important. Now, we are really lucky at the moment because we're based with the University of Wolverhampton's campus in Walsall, so we do have access to their testing equipment, and they do have some nice bits of kit, like they have force plates, they have quite a bit of valve stuff, but it's not always absolutely necessary. Before we kind of had this investment of sort of this $1.5 million gourmet gym, like we were basically using handheld dynamometers, we were using gym equipment to try and get an idea of what the output and things that people had were. And to be honest, that's what the vast majority of people will have in a clinical world is. But I would say that the bare minimum that you should have is something like a handheld dynamometer that's so variable, pretty affordable, puts numbers to things and data. In terms of sort of the shoulder scenarios,
just to interrupt 1 second, because I can hear how, for example, Israel's head's going, and other listeners maybe, and what other clients would say. Is that the same as doing it yourself in a gym and seeing how far down on the stack you can go? Can you use that as a measurement as well, or is there an advantage to having a third party?
100%, yeah. So I think it depends what you want to try and achieve. But yeah, most gyms, like if you've got access to load, you can actually start to stress significant amounts of tissue that starts to replicate some of the demands. Like I guess with an Achilles or a knee or something, you're probably looking at like 6 to 10 times body weight flying through it during running and things like that. Now, you're not going to put 6 to 10 times your own body weight on a bar by any stretch, but you do have to go heavy. So yeah, if you were looking at sort of just static isometric output, for example, or 1 RM, you're going to probably go pretty high. If you're looking at sort of almost comparing one side to the other, depending on the sport, like we use reps of 6, for example. What can the non-injured side do? How does that compare to the other side? If they're 6 rep, we find they're 6 rep max, for example, on one side, and then almost just mimic that on the other. If they're not even able to push it, or they're only able to get 2 reps, then we know that they're a little bit down. So yeah, lots of stuff that's in the gym. If we're going to do endurance things, I think most classic things like today, for example, we had a guy who's coming back from a patella dislocation. So we just went through some of the endurance testing with him, which again requires no kit. You're just doing single leg squats to failure, single leg hamstring bridges at sort of 30 degrees, long lever, because it's a bit more relevant to judo than fully bent, and then calf raises. So they're just body weight specific, but you're just looking at the endurance of that muscle. So again, there's lots of different ways that you can get ideas. For us, in the world that we're in, we have to go kind of to the next level from there to make sure that they are sort of mimicking some of the demands. But yeah, we've had probably 3 or 4 shoulder dislocations / subluxations that have come out in different ways. We've had a posterior. We actually had the full whammy. We've had a posterior, which is really rare, one of the first ones I've ever seen, an inferior and an anterior that's come out and popped back in again. And then we've had one of them that was an anterior dislocator that had to go on and have surgery. But the other 3 we've just managed conservatively. And some of the testing things that we would look at, I guess we get them looking at just the classic things, really. Keep it pretty simple, internal and external peak force, sort of holds for 5 seconds in each direction, repeat it 3 times, look at how quickly they create that force. Can they hold that force before it drops off? Is there a decline over those 3? So is there a fatigue element that's coming in? So they might be able to hit it really well on the first one. The graph looks lovely. It sort of goes straight up, straight across, and straight down. And then it starts to become a little bit more juttery, and the sort of recruitment and the output becomes a little bit more varied. So they can be little indicators of actually maybe the endurance of that isn't very good, but we're hitting the peak targets each time, but actually it's starting to drop off fatigue. So we need to build the endurance of that a little bit more. Is there an order to that you see, or does it again depend on the activity? But in terms of, so you're talking about strength based on maybe calculating 1 rep max and doing 6 reps and trying to achieve that, balancing the 2 sides. Is there an order in terms of build that and then work on endurance, or can you kind of periodize them and kind of change them over? What do you suggest? Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer that sometimes what you're doing in rehab should almost be the way that you then test. So you're almost working on something to improve that test. So you've got a direct correlation. The athlete or the individual you're working with can see that direct correlation that, oh, actually, I've been working on this, and then I'm going to get really good at this because my score was down. And then you test, get some numbers, and they're like, here's the reassurance and the sort of positive input, really, that everything that you've done and grafted on specific to this test is making you better. And we've deliberately picked a test that starts to mimic the injury positions that they may require. Now, in the earlier stages, you're never, if someone's dislocated, like, I'm never going to start to put them in their apprehensive position and really ram them as hard as I possibly can with a handheld dynamometer. So what we generally do is sort of get them lying flat, arms sort of upper arm supported in this sort of position, and then doing it here. But then they need to be out here when they're sort of in the later stages and going to go back into competition. So I think you can have the same lateral rotation in various different areas, and medial rotation. But gradually what you're doing is starting to work through the range and starting to work towards the ranges that maybe the injury happened with. So we get quite a lot of ours that pop out sort of opening up, horizontally abducting. They get caught when they're being thrown. One of them got caught across their body, which sounds a little bit more like Israel's scenario, where you almost punch in that way, but you get a lot of traction onto the sleeve. So again, the inferior dislocator was pretty worried about going into that position. But by and large, like, he sort of actually mimicked quite a lot of things. Bizarrely, we said he sort of set himself a challenge to get the biggest legs possible, because again, ACL injuries, he'd had an ACL injury on one side and a meniscal problem on the other side, and an LCL on the other side, and basically we gave him the challenge of creating massive legs. But what he'd done is then picked massive dumbbells off the rack to then do some split squats and things with. But the traction element from just holding dumbbells was pretty massive. So I was freaking out when he's like, oh, I was carrying the 45 kilogram dumbbells, blah, blah, blah. I was doing all my like PB, dumbbell squats and all that kind of thing. And I was freaking out going, did your shoulder feel all right? But I think he'd gone, well, it's a leg exercise, so it doesn't count.
Yeah.
So it'll be absolutely fine. But if you're an inferior dislocator and then ram 45 kilograms of downward force on that area, luckily he'd done this fairly late on, to be honest, because, and then he'd been doing some chins and hangs and all this kind of thing with absolutely no problem. And he'd actually been doing it off his own back. But yeah, he'd obviously kind of started to mimic some of these positions in rehab and then taken it upon himself much through lots of these. So yeah, I think it's just an incremental thing. We use quite a few other little tests, like maximal push-up challenges. We do some crossover upper limb tests, where you sort of tap in across between two. You're almost in a wide press up position and then tap in between the two lines. We do almost like a 𝐦-𝐒𝐻𝐸 test as well, where you're exploring the different ranges. They're things, again, that you can do really early on without jeopardizing or putting that limb or joint at risk of kind of re-injury. And it's just a case of building and building and building, and not kicking on until they hit those targets. So it gives them a really good motivator to get there.
Excellent. Great advice. A lot of the time, initially, it's often the case of finding what they can't do, finding something which provokes. You don't want to go, it depends what stage you are. You don't want to go straight into the most painful position and say, right, that's what we're going to keep doing. But you want to find what is painful, then move, like you say, slightly different angles, so it's less load or different direction of force or something. And I like the idea, comparing it to it's great. Most of us have got 2 arms, 2 legs. Actually, you work a lot with amputees, isn't it? So in that case, you haven't really got that luxury, have you? If you're helping somebody, you've got amputee in the judo team, haven't you? What do you do in that case when you haven't got
the judokas who are on the Paralympic side? They are visually impaired, so we actually don't have any amputees at all. But yeah, they're varying. There's 2 different categories that they fall into. But yeah,
so visually
they're
impaired.
all sort of fully.
I was watching the other day some amazing. It was actually jiu-jitsu, but it was double amputees. So obviously they had the same disadvantage, but it's just incredible. I mean, it was all ground game, but it was great. Oh, right. So that question doesn't apply. But yeah, balance, finding out what's happening on one side compared to the other, and I think it's really important, isn't it? Just writing things down, recording that data. I mean, that's one thing I find with athletes is, as human beings, we're going to have mornings where we wake up feeling great. And guess what? We'll have a great session at the gym normally. And we'll have mornings where we wake up terrible, maybe external influences, life getting in the way, and you have a terrible, and it seems like I'm not going anywhere. But if you could look in your little book, maybe on your iPad, where it is these days, and you can see that you're still heading in the right direction, that could be the shove you need to still remain optimistic and accept the bad days, with a grain of salt and get on. So that's so important, keeping data. I think in a realistic world, some clients, and again, I imagine Israel wants to do this all by himself because it costs, we're not going to lie. And that's something I think that therapists need to be aware of, is that their clients haven't got an endless amount of money. But I think it's really important in the early stages, and even just once a month, depending on income, of having that professional with you, isn't it? I mean, setting you the exercises, because it's easy just to go on a tangent and maybe miss what you're supposed to be doing, start getting it wrong. You work obviously with individuals who are ready to do what's necessary, although you do get limited time with them. But what's some of your advice for therapists who are listening, where they know the client hasn't got that much money, but they want to kind of persuade them and help them realize that you do need me? Not just because I'm making my living, believe me, I've got enough clients, but to help you, if my reputation is with you, I need to see you at least. What are some of the tips you've got for that?
It's a really good point. And I'm very mindful that, again, even at my stage, when I was working in private practice, the clinic that I worked for were charging £72 an hour. And I thought, like, if I was paying £72 an hour, like, which I can't necessarily afford to do regularly, I want an absolute like gourmet package of care. And actually, sometimes then you kind of flip, the old manager used to flip it the other way and kind of go, well, actually, like a call out charge for a plumber is 50 quid already before you even start doing anything. Like, you're doing a really skilled, really sort of niche role, which can have a huge impact in people's lives. But you're absolutely right. I think what were some of the ways that I think some of the areas, if we go down that way, that I used to go down was probably assume that people, when they come to private practice or they come and see you, they aren't getting some hands-on treatment in the NHS. So therefore you have to do hands-on treatment. But actually, I think as time goes on, people just want a really direct message and guidance on what they need to do and have goals and targets that they need to hit, and actually being empowered to make sure that they are listened to, as you said. So I think Mike James talks quite a lot about it being a total waste of time if you make this gourmet rehab plan and no one does it. If someone's only got time to do 2 exercises, then give them 2 exercises and just go with what are the 2 hardest hitting exercises that you can possibly give them. Because if you give them 5 or 3, they ain't going to do any of the other ones. So I think just understanding their demands and what they are actually willing to put into this, so you feel like you've created a little bit of an alliance with them and you're working with them rather than just dictating, well, I've worked with XYZ athlete and blah, 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 that this is how they've done it. The reality is people have full-time jobs, probably got kids, probably got other stresses, other hobbies, things that they want to do. So how are you going to fit that in, and where are you going to slot it in? And then the other one is kind of the Tom Goom effect, isn't it, where you should actually do one of the rehab programs that you've delivered to one of your athletes and just kind of realize that it's an hour and a half. So how the heck are they going to fit an hour and a half into lunchtime or whatever? But yeah, I think it's just something that actually kind of talking through the journey of this is where we're going to begin. If it's something like an ACL, usually it's about 12 months for where we are. It might take you 18 months, but actually these are some of the markers that we'd like to hit. These are the common points that we generally test at. You can depending on how motivated, how much cash they have, how much availability they have, is something that you can't control really. But how much are they willing to invest into you and the journey is really important. And I think I used to see it the other way, going, oh my God, I'm going to have to try and ram as much in. This person doesn't look like they've got much money, so actually I'm going to tell them to come back in a month, rather than just saying, actually, my recommendation would be that you come back in 2 weeks. We reassess where you are with things. Hopefully you've smashed everything that we've done and we get to kick you on to the next level. And if you're struggling or you're not really progressing as well as we'd hoped, then we'll address that, and maybe we'll vary things. I mean, some people will message their patients and clients and things in between sessions. I mean, I didn't used to, just because it was sort of a full clinic and I didn't have time. But again, if you've got little touch points or emails that allocate a morning to kind of just drop in and say, please let me know how you're getting on. I know there's clever apps, isn't there, that kind of say when people are doing exercises, what they've done. I think half the time people lie. They'll be sitting watching Netflix and filling in there. I've done 12 reps of this and 3 sets of that, and what have you. But I'm a bit of a skeptic. I don't often trust the athletes. It's probably just the world I work in. Because yeah, as you say, as I think we mentioned offline, they'll say they're fine, say they're ready to go on the mat, say they've done all this training, but when you actually sort of test them and get into the kind of nitty gritty of it, they're quite a long way off.
That's true. But again, that's the experience of knowing humans and understanding and doing the routine yourself. But yeah, so important to have markers, like you say, and breaking that, what could indeed be months if it's some kind of tendon repair. And it could be, they need those mini goals, don't they? Right, I've achieved this, fantastic, well done, let's do the next one. And I think, speaking from personally, if you do achieve these mini goals, then you'll find that 60, 70 quid from somewhere, because you can see your progress and you realize now, health, especially if it's your identity, it's your life, it's something you really need, you'll find money to do that. And I don't know, you'll have 3 less takeaways or something over the next 4 months, and suddenly you've got 100 quid. It's like, there's always ways. Cut back on your lattes every day. There is ways, isn't it? But that's up to us. And I love the way that therapists, and this may be listeners out there, sometimes you probably, especially less experienced therapists, will blame their patients. I gave them a great program, they didn't do it, and then they wonder why they're still hurting, and we put the blame onto them. When really, as you get a bit older and experienced, you realize they didn't do the exercises. What did I do wrong? Why didn't they do them? And I think that's a really important lesson. If people aren't doing the exercises and following the routine you give them.
Yeah, it's fascinating actually, because I've just invested in a monthly touch-in with a sports therapist actually, who's brilliant down here in Birmingham, because I need the accountability of actually making sure that my lower back does not seize up to high heaven with all the carrying and lifting of little ones and driving into works and all that kind of thing. And actually it's been brilliant. But this is the classic version of me. He gave me one hip flexor stretch to do, which is a really nice one. Hadn't seen it done before, really targeted exactly what I was doing. I felt fantastic afterwards. And 2 weeks went by and I hadn't done that stretch once. And I'm like, this is outrageous. He gave me one to do. Yeah. And I think it's just madness that, he gave me one exercise, which is probably the absolute creme de la creme response, the thing which helps the most. But now the back pain's creeping back. I'm now doing it religiously to keep me going, because we played football today and my back is now tight as a drum again.
Yeah. Why do you think you didn't do it?
Why didn't I do it?
Yeah.
Honestly, just life kind of got in the way, and then you kind of went, right, well, you're up at 6 with the little man, and then you kind of go, right, let's get his breakfast out the house by sort of 7:15, drop him off at school at 7:45, and then you pick him up on the other side, you're back in, and then classic kind of rat race. But brutally honestly, could I have done those things at work? 100%. Even if I was watching someone doing some exercises, I would have gone, why don't I just do it now? So that's now what I do. And
I used to find out just if I had to do some rehab, I would just magically decide that, I know what exercise you need to do. Talk to my client. I'll do it with you, and just make sure that they're doing your rehab program. They'll probably get better as well. We all know, according to Greg Lehman, you can do any exercises, you'll get better eventually. So you can just give people your rehab rotation program. It's fine. Right. It's that went very quickly, didn't it? 1 minute to 9. I wanted to touch as well on mistakes people make in thinking, I've got the strength, I've got the endurance. Let's go straight back to the rugby pitch or something, because you mentioned this word chaos, and that's something which I think a lot of listeners might be missing from the rehab program. Just briefly, if it's okay with you, if you've got the time, what are some ways you create, or first just give us an idea what chaos and neuromuscular preparation is, and how do you recreate that as part of a rehab program?
Yeah, so I mean, this is very dependent on what sport you're doing and what position you are and where you play and all that kind of thing. But what I think you try to do in rehab is, during the latter stages in particular, it's great if you've got a theme that goes through, like if they play ball sports, you try and incorporate a ball as quick as possible. If they can't move around very much, you still have the skill sort of acquisition bits that are kicked in, but it might be in sitting. But in the latter stages, I think this is brilliant for creativity and keeping you interested in what you're doing. And if you don't, normally what you'll do is understand someone's sport and what their demands are, but ask the individual, ask the coaches, do a little bit of research behind the scenes, maybe watch some YouTube clips on whatever it happens, and then start to think about ways to recreate a training environment without as many variables, and then sort of gradually, incrementally introduce people who are maybe going 25%, 50%, 75%, 100% all in, intensity-wise, velocity-wise. So they start to get a gradual feel of getting back into it. They build confidence. They don't get re-injured.
So give us an idea with judo, because judo is obviously just one-on-one. So, you haven't got to watch the whole pitch with people suddenly coming in, across the other side and driving into and tackling you. But when you've got a one-on-one judo and you want to take out some of the variables, how could you regress it so you're still challenging some of that reaction time, but not actually going full in?
Yeah, so I mean, some of the things that we'll do quite a lot of shadow work with them. So you'll have two people sort of facing each other, They might be holding on to each other, but one's sort of the attacker, if you like, trying to escape. The other one's a defender, and they're almost trying to shadow each other wherever they go. And that might be forwards, backwards, front, back, and then basically gradually just build that into, right, well, actually you're starting to add little pulls and rotations onto them as they try and sort of almost mirror you. We have
and it's all very reactive. So the person who's being rehabbed is just reacting according to which way they're pulled, rather than safely doing 10 repetitions or something. Yeah,
exactly. So they do these sort of bizarre little dances around the mat and things as well, and they sort of turn in, and we've got sort of bands to do the almost mimic the positions that they go into as they're sort of turning and throwing, and we get them to throw dummies and things like that. But yeah, it's better if you've got someone with them, and they, as I say, they sort of pair up, they do these little dances, they turn in, they might just lift up somebody for a throw rather than kind of going all in. And then they have something called sort of open randori and grip fighting, which is where the intensity starts to kind of really ramp up quite a lot. But open randori is very much, randori, for anyone who doesn't know, is sort of that just free flying fighting competition that they have. Open randori seems to be a little bit more, we call it like a gentleman's agreement. So you're basically fighting the other opponent, but if someone goes to throw, that opponent allows that person to throw them. So they don't resist it. They don't kind of lock in and try and prevent that movement. If they've kind of earned the right to throw, they go with it. So they're getting a lot of intensity. You sometimes might get them to do 30 seconds of just literally gripping, and then almost like whistle goes, it's gone live. And then, whoever sort of gets into a position where they're going to attack and throw, the other person sort of allows them to do that. So they're getting a lot of stimulus, the feel of the mat, the feel of moving around. It's competitive, but it's still got that little out channel that you sort of have an escape route of. You're not going to really injure yourself as long as you're with someone of that level. We've got lots of weight categories as well. So, I mean, you could chuck someone who's lighter weight with someone who's a little bit heavier to start with, which is quite nice. In sort of football or rugby worlds I've been, you can kind of get them to play with the academy for a little bit, or sort of pick and choose key people who are maybe not as athletic or as intense. On that, I would be very careful who you pick. I remember I used to working in rugby. I remember doing a bit of tackle sort of reintroduction stuff. So we just had like a 5-meter channel, really, where you had an attacker at one end, you throw the ball to the attacker, and their job is to try and get past the defender, however they may do. So they're starting to work on reactivity, acceleration, deceleration, reading the game, almost like doing little steps. But actually the rule was that almost in gladiator style, you just almost kind of gauntlet them, hold them, and then take them to the ground. But God, I remember this Scottish international absolutely melting this guy who came back from a fractured, dislocated ankle, and he was just starting to build that up. And he literally came flying in, even though he'd been told, all I want you to do is do a really kind of gauntlet-y version, blocking him more than tackling. He literally almost like speared him into the ground. You're like, come on, help me out here. We're trying to build his confidence, get him back into a little bit of this, and literally did it again. And then we had to abandon it because some of these individuals will only be 100%. They have no filter of anything less than. So do be very careful who you pick as your sort of little training rehab partners and things. But people put bibs and things on people to try and look after them. I'd never found that worked in rugby. Everyone just got smashed no matter what they were wearing. But yeah, I think it's just almost try best you possibly can to recreate some of those positions. If you have to grab someone and just almost get them to mimic a certain movement and then put it into a sort of a live scenario, would be great. But yeah, feel free to like ask people, what is it that you do in your position? What are you a little bit apprehensive about? Have you got certain scenarios that I'm not aware of? And how can we mimic that scenario so you drill that until you are feeling much more confident?
Yeah, so that's interesting. So this is to a certain degree the therapist, as long as they've got insurance, could, and who they're working with, but they could work with that person to recreate some of that reactivity. Because it's always kind of, there's often a fear, isn't it? If you don't do the sport that your client does, you're like, oh, how am I going to help you? But just talk to them and mimic it and force them basically to react in the same way they would have to on the pitch. But again, I think this is where, again, at the later stages, people who are injured and coming back will need to work with you. And it may even be you going to their place of sport and having a look what's going on, and then organize a program or something according to what you see and that sort of stuff. So rather than, again, just thinking, right, they've walked out of my clinic room now, that's it, good luck, see you later, send me some photos. There's so much more, isn't there, to do otherwise.
Yeah, and it's amazing how open everybody is. I mean, judo is a bit unique, isn't it? But people love teaching you about the sport they love as well, which is really nice. So yeah, ask questions. A really good point, yeah, about sort of if you aren't sure of how they're going to reintegrate back into a session at training or something, if you were to offer to go down and watch that or chat to the coach beforehand about what elements training looks like, it's a really useful educational piece. And who knows what sort of opportunities and things that might come on the back of it, really.
Brilliant. And you're probably going to be doing more than a lot of the other therapists in your region and area, just doing that little bit extra, which is great.
You're not going to do everyone, are you? But you're going to cherry pick your juicy ones, people who you actually like and care about.
Of course, yeah. If they deserve it, obviously, that's the caveat for this, if they deserve it. Brilliant. And then just finally, there's always going to be variance amongst physios or sports therapists, whatever person you go and see. So how do you, because I mean, for example, with Israel, there's reported to me, and according to him, there's GPs he's seen who've basically said, never, you can't do jiu-jitsu ever again, without really doing more than a 15-minute chat. Definitely didn't go down to the mat and watch him for a while. There's been physios as well who have said, no, just stay out of the gym. And again, they haven't really assessed much. So there's, how do people out there, actually, with people listening to this are therapists, so how do they advertise their services so that people know that they are in the know, that they have done your courses, that they're going to give what you need, as opposed to some of the mainstream people who have all the best intentions in the world, but they just haven't got the education? How do you advertise that on your website to make people realize I'm your man or woman?
Yeah, I mean, I think qualifications are obviously things that you can have on there, your kind of letters and what you've done, who you've worked with, what your experiences are, all sound quite nice. I mean, I think on that, like, even when I probably learned more sometimes at sort of lower levels than I did when I went to kind of elite level. So it's not the prestige that you have to have, but that definitely stands out more on a website. So if you're not at a top Premiership club, or you're sort of in a Division 2, 3 kind of territory, or even sort of lower levels than that, then you can still learn absolutely tons, and it's worth putting on there what you've been doing. There are loads of courses and things out there that you can kind of upskill with and add your certificates on. Little plug for Grow Physio Academy. Obviously, you can kind of go on there, get your certificates once you complete a course and do the exam. Little short quiz at the end, then you'll get a certificate that says you've got your certification in injury reduction strategies, or Achilles management, or ACL management, whatever it may be. I think if you have a particular niche that you really like, or different sports that you've worked with, it's amazing, particularly with surgeons, if they, like, we've got surgeons that we use in Premiership Rugby, or there's ones who are used for football. And as soon as they establish this name of, wow, they've done such and such, or they are a specific sport related surgeon. Personally, I think the surgeries by and large pretty much the same across the board. Like, there's some who are obviously at the top of their game and have little slight differences that they do, like they might add a little tenodesis or something in like that, or understand a sport a little bit more. But how that is totally understood when you're digging around in someone's knee or whatever it is, I think there's probably some little changes and some little amendments, but it's amazing how much power that has if you sort of associate yourself with being a mixed martial art, or a rugby, or a football related, or you've got a niche. Like, I don't know, even just sort of saying I only saw one, but kind of managed probably one of the worst ankles I've ever managed in sport, back to GB handball. And I'd never, ever worked with handball people before, but actually I feel so much more competent understanding the game, the demands, the positions. And I actually took my little boy to watch a couple of the games when she returned back into sport. And again, it was sort of lovely to see that end product, and her come and celebrate sort of afterwards, and make a big deal out of my little boy. Do you know what I mean? At the end, which is really nice, and sort of, sometimes being part of that journey, you just build up such a close relationship with people that actually it doesn't feel like it's work or extra stuff. It's something you'd like to do and go and support them with. So Yeah, I'd probably just list the sports and things that you've kind of done, what certificates and things you've maybe done.
That's a good idea. Make it personal, your website, so people can see that you are an active, you're educating yourself. And yeah, like you said, stories of where you've nursed an athlete back to health, worked with them, and then photos of the success and stuff. It's all very good.
Yeah, take stupid photos with Olympic.
With 5, Olympic
judokas,
what are they called?
Judokas, they're called.
Judokas, without an end at the end. Yeah, judokas. Yeah, that would be good for your website.
Yeah, it's really important, because I think taking photos and almost capturing that moment, it seems a bit cringe at the time. But yeah, I'm just looking down at my little signed gi that all the girls kind of put on, which I get one day I'll get framed and probably put in like my little man cave somewhere. But they're really nice things to kind of keep and cherish.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Excellent. Right, I've already kept you for longer than I told you I was going to. So thank you so much for joining us, Steve. Really, really appreciate it. Gary Benson here as well. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, says Gary, and expertise, Steve. Look forward to catching up at Therapy Expo, which is only like end of November, isn't it? That's scary. That's come around very quickly. But yeah, I mean, actually, that's a nice segue, actually, people. You know, I would these days align yourself really with Therapy Expo and make a sing and dance about that, because the quality of speakers there these days really are on the large exceptional. Because now for the last 3 years, there's been they've been asking people like the STA, people like 𝐼𝐸𝐴 from the school, and people who are in the industry to actually recommend speakers, as opposed to just picking them out of a hat sort of thing. Also, it's a really high level there. So anybody who is aligning themselves with them and talking about who they're seeing there will be getting quality information. So, including Steve, who's going to be there as well, talking about, I believe, this kind of topic, about return to sport and markers and things. But it's going to be fantastic.
It'd be nice to have some videos to show you now, with all the protocols and things on of what some of these tests are, because if you aren't familiar with them, it's quite hard to know exactly and describe. So yeah, and please bring questions. It's probably the best bit, isn't it? If you've got scenarios or anything you want to contact me about, then please do.
Fantastic. And thank you everyone who joined us live. Thank you for the questions, everybody who came along. If you listen to the podcast and you do fancy joining us live, then like I say, 8 o'clock on a Tuesday normally, on either YouTube, Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel, or if you prefer on Facebook, the Sports Therapy Association Facebook page. Speaking of which, next Tuesday, 8 o'clock, which is going to be July the 30th, depending when you're listening to this, do come along live. It's going to be an important one next week live. STA207. We'll be talking about statutory regulation for sports therapists, with Gary Benson, founder of the STA, and also 𝐼𝐸𝐴 from the ST School, because we're going to be chewing over and talking about the pros and the cons. And also what we really want to do is address some of the common beliefs and reasons which are given. And we may reinforce them, we may challenge them, we may give a little bit of information, a bit of history, a bit of perspective, which might change your mind. It might, it might sway you, which is always the most exciting thing about debate, isn't it? Being open to actually changing your mind, adjusting your position. So there are going to be some social media posts about statutory regulation with a little bit of history about the latest things that have been released and talked about. And we want to hear you in the comments about why you think it would be a good idea if we had statutory regulation, why you think it might not be a good idea, and so on. So do please, if you listen to the podcast or you join us this evening, then do try and contribute to those comments so we can use them next week. Otherwise, you're just going to listen to us three talking, and it'd be far more interesting if we had your input as well. That's it. So once again, thanks to Steve Miller of Grow Physio. If you want to go to the website, it's growphysio.academy.com. And if you are interested in the course, people, then there's one tomorrow night on Achilles tendinopathies, with an STA discount. Go to the member area, but there's plenty of courses on the website there, which I would recommend you have a little look through and decide what could work for you and your target audience. Thanks everyone. Steve, thanks once again.
Thanks so much for having me, and congrats on doing an amazing job, and thanks for hosting
very nice of you.
Pro, like you're on your 207th.
I know, 207. Fantastic. Amazing. Thanks everyone. Take care, and hopefully we'll see some of you for the next episode. Bye-bye.